I'm worthless. No one likes me. I'm ugly. I'm not good enough. I'm a loser. I'm a failure. I hate myself. Do any of these thoughts sound familiar to you? Well, if you're nodding your head yes, there's thousands of other people watching this video right now also nodding their head yes, because these thoughts are incredibly normal, but they're unhelpful. Getting stuck in them just results in the downward spiral of depression and having a bad relationship with yourself. So within the next 17 minutes of your time, let's unpack exactly why these self-defeating thoughts are so sticky and the 4 ways you can better deal with them instead of being consumed by them. Now let's cover why self-defeating thoughts are so sticky. The bottom line is, they're sticky because they feel familiar and logical, no matter how negative they are. But if you want 3 more reasons as to their stickiness as per chewing to the brain, then here they are. Number 1 is survival. Your brain is optimized for it. You've heard it before, it was the caveman who was constantly focusing on the negative things in his environment that survived. Don't need to remind you of that. Number 2, your mind is a storyteller. Life itself is very chaotic and complex and information heavy. So in order to make sense of all of this information, your brain needs to simplify it into a structure with certainty. And that's what stories offer it. As the therapist Joe Oliver says, the mind prioritizes keeping a story intact over questioning whether it's true. Banging quote. Number 3, association. To demonstrate this, let's quickly take the next 15 seconds to do a quick exercise together. Question. What does a whale and an aubergine, eggplant if you're from the US, have in common? Take 15 seconds to have a think. Five seconds left. Me está soñando la tripa. My belly is rumbling. Okay, you might have thought that you can both throw them in water, they're the same shape, and you can eat them both, maybe. But regardless of whether you came up with associations or not, what this demonstrates is your brain's ability to take 2 completely random things and combine them together to find similarities between them both. Relaying this back to the context of self-defeating thoughts, this might manifest in the context of you had an experience when you was younger of someone, a parent or a teacher, telling you that you're not good enough. Then your brain associates that past experience with new experiences of you failing. Whenever you mess up, your brain then associates that new experience as confirmation with your previous experience that you're not good enough. That's how associations can work in a very negative way. To demonstrate that from a personal lens, when I was 19, I was working on a construction site for about 6 months, and the man I was working with, he was about 40 years old. He was one of the most narcissistic men I've ever met in my life. And every time, because I was his labourer basically, so I was working with him and he would give me tasks throughout the day on the construction site. But each time I did a task of his and I messed it up, he would scream and shout at me. And I became so desensitized to this that at the time I just thought it was normal. I was a young lad, I was like, okay, I'm going travelling in 6 months, I just need the money, I'll put up with it. But it wasn't until a year later that I was in the kitchen with my ex-girlfriend at the time, and I had planned to cook a meal. I was cooking this green pesto steak with loads of vegetables or something, and I was following a recipe, but for some reason I was chopping the vegetables wrong, the pot was boiling over, and everything was just going into a hot, chaotic mess. Making it even worse, my ex-girlfriend was standing there asking, like, are you okay? Do you need help with anything? It seems like it's all, going tits up. And the thoughts that I was attacking myself with in that moment were horrible. All I could think about was how much of a failure I was, how much of a loser I was. I could never do anything right, all because I messed up a simple meal and couldn't follow a recipe. But it wasn't until my emotions calmed down and I started to unpack it the day after that I realized, oh, those thoughts in my head weren't my own. I was still carrying those negative reactions and thoughts of my ex-boss. So that was an example of how this association can work. But now, let's cover why trying to grapple and wrestle with these self-defeating thoughts never works. Highlighting the title of this video, don't wrestle with your self-defeating thoughts, try this instead. I would go eat something, but got a lecture to do. The standard advice we're given from the self-help and psychological world is, in order to challenge our negative thoughts, we need to argue with them. For example, you have the thought, I'm not good enough. Challenge it, we're told. That's not true, I've achieved things. But then the thought follows up. Maybe, but what if I fail this time? Again, we're implored to challenge it. No, I'll be fine, I've got this. But although this might help, challenging your thoughts, short term, long term is just going to create more of a problem. Because the heart of the matter is, even by challenging your thoughts, you're paying the negative one more attention. And this checks out neuroscientifically as well, because this negative thought, especially if it's based upon associations in your experiences, has built an ingrained network within your brain through rehearsal. You think the thought, you wrestle with it, you're engaging with it, you're paying this neurological network attention, so that gives your brain the feedback of, oh, this thing is clearly important, let's keep this network alive, so it becomes strengthened. It's only whenever you stop paying attention to something that your brain gets the feedback of, oh, we're not using this thing anymore, let's get rid of this network. Remember the neuroscientific principle, use it or lose it. It's the same if you stop speaking your language for the next 30 years, eventually you would forget how to speak it. Linking this back to the idea of association, one more problem of paying more attention to your self-defeating thoughts is it increases the possibility that it's going to trigger other self-defeating thoughts. For example, you think, I'm not good enough. You engage with it more. And then that sparks the association of other thoughts such as, what if I fail? What if they judge me? What if I'm successful but then I can't maintain my success? So zooming out here, what we need is a solution that isn't going to get you to wrestle with your self-defeating thoughts, but is instead going to change how you relate to them. This is what we're going to finalise the video now with. 4 ways based upon the psychologists' work, Joe Oliver and Christy Potter. I've been reading their work recently. Oh, Potter! Let's go. The 4 ways. Number 1 is recognise when a thought is unworkable. The reason why self-defeating thoughts are so powerful is because when we weigh them up, they're kind of true. Harsh truth of the day. If I take the thought of, I'm not good enough, I mean, yeah, we all have room to grow. What does it mean to be good enough? And if I take the thought of, what if I fail, if I'm about to do something? Again, it kind of checks out, I'm probably going to fail at this thing. So the solution in the face of this is to use something called ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, whereby, again, as we covered in the last part, you don't try to wrestle with the thought and figure out whether it's true or not. Instead, you evaluate it based on its workability. And you can do so by asking these 2 questions. Number 1, you think the thought? Okay, you ask these 2 questions. Does this thought help me live the life I want? Number 2, does it move me towards what is important to me? Really interesting questions, these 2. I found that since learning all of this stuff and preparing the video, I've been practicing asking these questions in response to my own self-defeating thoughts. And what I've noticed is, if the answer to these 2 questions is no in response to you thinking a thought, the thought will naturally fade away. Because it's almost as if your brain then concludes, well, if the answer is no, this thought is clearly not helpful anymore, so let's just get rid of it. Weigh it up based on its workability. I really like this word as well. Something to think about. Point number 2. Number 2, connect to the present moment. I know this is where it gets a bit, I'm going to tune off because he's going to tell us about mindfulness, but stay with me. Thinking a self-defeating thought clearly takes you out of the present moment. So to get yourself back in it, here's a quick 3-step process. Number 1, notice what is happening. Use that powerful tool of metacognition, your brain's ability to observe itself, and simply say out loud, perhaps, oh, I'm having a self-defeating thought. Then number 2, focus your attention on the sensory experiences of your surroundings. What do you taste? What can you smell? What can you hear? What can you see? Or simply tune in to the rhythm and sound of your breath. And then repeat this whenever the self-defeating thought creeps back up, which it will. Quick note here, we have an amazing tool at our disposal 24/7, our breath. As the saying goes, the mind is the master over the body, but the breath is the master over the mind. In my experience, the easiest way to reorient yourself back to the present moment is to tune in to the simple sound and rhythm of your breath. Bonus points if you're doing something like breath work. 30 minutes of that, knock your bandy, son. But what we're talking about here is gaining distance from your self-defeating thoughts. So here are 3 more things, very quick, that will help you do so. That are very quick. I was thinking too much about breathwork then, messed up my grammar. Another problem of self-defeating thoughts is we take them as facts, but they're not, they're just thoughts. But anyway, here are the quick 3 ways of gaining distance. Number 1, notice the thought without judgment. You might say, oh, there's that thought that I'm not good enough. Don't chastise yourself for having this thought. Number 2, use distance in language. I'm going to bring you a bit closer, and what I want you to do is, one by one, just read these sentences to yourself in your head as if you're having the thought. And I just want you to tap into how each one feels. Come. Okay, let's do this one first. Read that in your head. Okay, how does that feel? Then let's go on to this one. Read this one in your head. Now this one. Hopefully, you noticed that these last 2 obviously allowed you to gain more distance from that very self-defeating thought. And when you fought this self-defeating thought, it was a bit more of a negative, there was a bit more of a negative pang to it. This is an example of how you can gain more distance. And then finally, number 3, can you see that? Notice the thought with humour. You might simply say to your mind, oh, thanks for trying to protect me, mind, because that's what it's trying to do. I remember a few years ago I was on a hike. 6 days in, I was by myself. I had been walking 25 miles that day or so. I was tired out of my brain and I was really starting to criticise myself for some weird reason as I was walking across a lovely British field. And as I started walking across this field, with each step I took, I found myself becoming more and more negative within my thoughts. So I suddenly started to look at everything around me and pretend I was some drunk man stumbling over a field and talking to myself, acting with a bit of humour, and it instantly snapped me out of the self-defeating thought. That's a quick example. Walk across a field as a drunk man. Point number 3. Okay, now you understand the importance of evaluating the self-defeating thought based on its workability and then connecting yourself to the present moment. Now you need to make choices that align with your values. This is the next step in defeating self-defeating thoughts. You need to take action. And you can do so by asking yourself these questions. How would I like to act in this moment? What's important to me right now? And finally, if I could choose to be the kind of person I want to be, what steps would I take? To give you one quick demonstration of the potency of values when it comes to looking past our self-defeating thoughts, take a look at this example. Let's imagine you've just started a new hobby, such as salsa dancing, but you're not very good at it. Yeah, you've only been doing it for 3 weeks, so the self-defeating thought has arisen of I'm not good enough. And that has made you tempted to quit the hobby, chuck in the towel and just stop trying. But then instead of sinking further into that self-defeating thought, you take a moment to have a quick reflection on what your values are, which are discipline, courage, and self-respect. And based on that criteria, you then reassess whether you actually want to quit or not. And you realise, well, if my values are discipline and courage, a way I can act in line with these values is to continue learning, with the understanding that I can get better. 3 months later, you've jetted off to Cali, Colombia, and you're teaching the instructors how to salsa dance. Que bien, papi. Finally, point number 4. So the point there is to reflect on your values. And use them to weigh up the self-defeating thoughts in your mind. And if you take, just a quick, I know I'm waffling on, but if you take let's say your value is self-respect, that's instantly going to dissolve any self-defeating thought you have, because you can simply realise, oh, this thought isn't loving to myself, it's not in line with my values, adios. Finally, point number 4, tune into the emotion behind the thought. You'll be hard pressed to find a self-defeating thought that isn't tied to an emotion. And true personal freedom comes from tapping into your emotions with curiosity rather than judgment, in order to learn what they're trying to teach you. But it just so happens tapping into your emotions is also a great way to distance yourself from self-defeating thoughts. Because if we take these examples of I'm not good enough, no one likes me, I'm a loser, you might find the underlying emotions for these are, first one, fear, second one, sadness, third one, guilt. You can simply highlight the underlying emotion by asking what emotion is tied to this self-defeating thought or observing what you currently feel. And once you highlight the emotion, you can then distance yourself from the self-defeating thought by simply focusing your energy on regulating the emotion rather than tackling the thought. Now, I'm not going to teach you right now how to regulate the emotions. I'll leave a video at the end of this video which you can watch, which will teach you how to do so. It's about similar length to this video. But just a quick buzz on it here. Always remember that an emotion wants you to pursue something or avoid it. That's why we use the words positive and negative to describe emotions. We don't mean positive as good or negative as bad. We mean positive, move towards, negative, move away from. That's what you might like to approach the emotion with in mind. If you take the emotion of guilt, for example, guilt is motivating you to not do whatever sparked the guilt in the first place. Sadness could be motivating you to awaken to new avenues of self-compassion or grieving. Fear is obviously motivating you to avoid something, but at the same time, it can be an indication of a task that you need to complete. So tune into the emotion and you'll likely see that the self-defeating thought will dissolve by itself. In summary, self-defeating thoughts are sticky because the mind wants story and familiarity. Wrestling with them just causes them to strengthen. Shut up, dog. So 4 better ways of dealing with them are, see how many more barks we get, bloody hell. Recognise when a thought is unworkable. 2, connect to the present. 3, make a choice that aligns with your values. And number 4, tap into the emotion behind the thought so you can regulate the emotion and see the thought dissolve. Check out this video here on how to regulate your emotions. But in other news, thank you very much for your time and attention. If you enjoyed the structure and the content of this video, comment a trio of emojis down below of an orangutan, a wizard, and then the third emoji as your favourite emoji. Stay disciplined, playful, y peligroso. Adiós muchachos y muchachas.